That evening, I rewrote my entire legacy. It wasn't a decision made over weeks or months. It was made in the few hours between being abandoned at a hospital by my own son and him showing up on my doorstep, smiling, with a loan application for $200,000 in his hand. The smell of antiseptic was still on my clothes as I sat in my old leather armchair, the one my late wife always called my throne. I was in pain, recovering from major surgery and utterly alone. They thought my body was weak, so my mind must be too. They saw the house I built not as a home filled with memories, but as collateral. They saw me not as a father, but as a signature on a dotted line. They were wrong, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. Because what I pulled from my desk that night wasn't a checkbook. It was a declaration of independence they never saw coming. Before the silence of this house became a weight, it was a comfort. It was a living, breathing thing, filled with the echoes of a life well lived. My days before the surgery followed a rhythm as steady as my own heartbeat. I'd wake just as the sun began to spill pale gold light over the oak trees in the backyard, the same trees Helen and I planted as saplings back in the spring of 1987, the year we finally finished building this place. The first thing I'd do is make coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling the kitchen and chasing away the last remnants of sleep. I'd take my mug to the living room and settle into my old leather armchair. That chair, it wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was an archive. The leather, worn smooth and cracked in places, held the shape of my body after 35 years of use. It smelled faintly of old books, pipe tobacco from decades ago, and Helen's lemon polish. From that chair, I watched my son Mark take his first steps on the shag rug we used to have. From that chair, I helped him with his calculus homework, the lamplight pooling around us in the quiet evenings. And it was from that chair that Helen would watch me, a soft smile on her face, and say, "You look like a king on his throne, Clark." Now, it was just me, but the memories were so thick in the air you could almost touch them. They were the invisible beams that held this house together. My life wasn't extravagant, but it was full. I spent my mornings in the garage, a place that was my sanctuary. The scent of sawdust and motor oil was my version of aromatherapy. I still have the first birdhouse Mark and I built together, sitting on a shelf. He must have been 7. His small hands struggled to hold the hammer steady, but his eyes were wide with the magic of creating something from nothing. I can still feel the phantom weight of his hand in mine as I guided his swing. "Slow and steady, son," I'd told him. "Measure twice, cut once. You build things to last." We spent a whole Saturday on it. And when we were done, he held it up like a trophy. That was the foundation I thought I had laid for him. Patience, pride in your own work, the value of building something real. When Mark met Chloe, things began to change, slowly at first. Their visits became a little shorter, the conversations a little more focused on their careers, their expenses, the next big thing they were chasing. I remember one Sunday dinner, not long after they got married. Chloe was looking around the living room, her gaze lingering on the dark wood paneling and the stone fireplace. "This is a great house, Clark," she'd said, though her tone felt more like an appraisal than a compliment. "So much land. It's a lot of upkeep for one person, though." I just smiled and told her I enjoyed the work. But a small, cold knot formed in my stomach that day. It was the first time I felt like a guest in my own home. The first time someone looked at this house not as a place of love and memory, but as a property with a certain square footage. Still, when they needed a down payment for their first home, I didn't hesitate. I drove to the bank on a Tuesday, September 15, 2018, and withdrew $50,000 from my retirement savings. It was nearly everything I had liquid at the time. I handed Mark the cashier's check that afternoon. He was speechless. He hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. "Dad, I don't know what to say. We'll pay you back, every cent." I just patted his back. "Don't be silly," I told him. "This isn't a loan. It's a foundation. Go build your life on it." I never felt a moment of regret. Seeing the joy on his face, the future opening up for him, that was the only dividend I ever wanted. I thought I was investing in his happiness. I had no idea I was just funding the first step in a plan that would eventually see me as an obstacle to be managed, a resource to be drained. I was his father, but to them I was becoming a line item on a balance sheet. And I was completely blind to it. The cracks started small, almost too fine to notice, like hairline fractures in old porcelain. They began appearing in the Sunday dinners. What used to be a comfortable ritual of roasting chicken and shared stories slowly morphed into a performance. Mark and Chloe would arrive in their new pearl-white SUV, a car that always seemed too clean, too quiet. The sound of its engine was a soft hum, a stark contrast to the familiar rumble of my old truck. They'd walk in, and the atmosphere in the house would instantly shift, becoming thinner, more formal. Chloe would bring a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly groceries, placing it on the counter with a practiced gesture, as if presenting an offering. I remember one particular evening the air was thick with the scent of rosemary from the potatoes I'd made just the way Mark used to love them. We were sitting in the living room, and Chloe's eyes were doing that thing they did, scanning, assessing. She wasn't looking at the family photos on the mantel, she was looking at the ceiling height, the width of the doorways. "You know, Clark," she said, swirling the deep red wine in her glass. "Our friends, Jessica and Tom. Their parents just sold their big family home. They moved into one of those luxury condos downtown. No yard work, 24-hour concierge. They travel half the year now. It's the smart play. Unlocking all that equity." Her words hung in the air, polished and sharp. I glanced at Mark. He was staring into his glass, refusing to meet my eye. He just shrugged. "It makes sense for some people, I guess." He didn't say, "But not for us, Dad. This is home." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything he didn't say. The discomfort followed me into my garage. That space had always been my own, a kingdom of sawdust and steel where I could think. One Saturday, Mark and Chloe stopped by unannounced. I was restoring an old rocking chair, the wood grain slowly reappearing under layers of worn varnish. The smell of turpentine was sharp in the air. Chloe stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a wrinkle of distaste on her nose. "Wow, there's a lot of stuff in here," she commented. Her gaze fell on the little birdhouse on the shelf, the one Mark and I built. Its paint was faded, the roof slightly crooked. "Mark, you could clear all this junk out. We could help you install proper cabinetry, maybe an epoxy floor. It would add so much value to the property." Mark just laughed, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, maybe one day, Dad. Make it look a little more modern." He called my life's work junk. He looked at the birdhouse we built together, a monument to a Saturday spent with his father, and saw nothing but clutter in the way of a higher resale value. I didn't say anything, I just ran my hand over the worn wood of the rocking chair, feeling the deep grooves. The foundation felt like it was turning to sand beneath my feet. After that, the phone calls changed. They stopped being about catching up and started having a purpose. It was always a gentle lead-in, a few questions about my health, and then the pivot. "By the way, Dad, we're a little tight this month. The property taxes on the new house were higher than we expected. Could we possibly borrow $2,000 until my bonus comes in?" The first time, I transferred the money without a second thought. It was $2,000 on November 3rd. The second time was for $3,500 on January 21st, for an emergency plumbing issue that sounded suspiciously like the custom hot tub they'd been talking about. Each time, Mark's voice was strained, hurried. Each time, the promise to pay it back was vaguer than the last. They weren't asking for help. They were making withdrawals. I was no longer just a father. I was a contingency fund, an untapped line of credit they felt entitled to. The final crack before the shattering came about a month before my surgery. They came over for dinner, and this time they brought a guest, a real estate agent. A woman named Brenda with a plastic smile and a briefcase full of market analyses. Chloe introduced her as a friend who was just curious to see the house she'd heard so much about. For an hour I sat in my leather armchair, my throne, and watched this stranger walk through my life, pointing out good bones and potential for an open concept layout. She spoke about my home as if I wasn't there, discussing its value per square foot, the zoning laws, the current market trends. Mark followed her around, nodding eagerly, while Chloe steered the conversation. "And the backyard is over an acre, Brenda. Very rare in this area." They were appraising my memories. They were measuring my past for a price tag. When they left, the house felt violated, cold. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the silence pressing in. I finally understood. They didn't see a home built with love. They saw an asset. And I was just the aging occupant, standing in the way of their next big investment. The doorbell chimed at precisely 8:12 p.m., a sharp, electronic sound that sliced through the heavy silence of the house. Every muscle in my body screamed as I pushed myself out of the leather armchair. Leaning heavily on the walker, each step was a slow, grinding effort. The short journey from the living room to the front door felt like a mile. The throbbing in my hip was a constant, angry drumbeat, a rhythm of betrayal set by my own son. Through the peephole, I saw them standing on the porch, illuminated by the yellow glow of the outdoor light. Mark and Chloe. Their posture was perfect, their expressions a carefully crafted blend of concern and apology. They looked like they had just stepped out of a magazine, not like two people who had left their father stranded after major surgery. I turned the deadbolt, the sound echoing in the empty hall, and pulled the heavy oak door open. A blast of cool night air washed over me, carrying the scent of damp earth and Chloe's expensive, floral perfume. "Dad!" Mark's voice was too loud, too cheerful. "We are so sorry about today. It was just one of those days from hell." Chloe glided past me, placing a single paper bag of groceries on the hall table. It was a prop, a token gesture in a poorly rehearsed play. "We were so worried," she added, her voice smooth as silk. She didn't look worried. She looked impatient, her eyes already scanning the interior of the house. They followed me back into the living room, their movements quick and energetic, a stark contrast to my own pained shuffle. I lowered myself back into my throne, the leather groaning in protest. They sat on the sofa opposite me, the one Helen had picked out 30 years ago. For a moment, we just sat there, the space between us charged with unspoken words. Then, Mark leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The mask of concern slipped, replaced by an eager, almost predatory gleam. He slid a glossy, tri-fold brochure across the polished surface of the coffee table. It was followed by a thick stack of documents held together by a binder clip. "Dad, listen," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The reason today was so crazy is because an incredible opportunity came up. A once-in-a-lifetime deal." He tapped the brochure. "It's a real estate venture. A small commercial development just off the new highway exit. We got an inside track, but the buy-in is significant. We have to secure the financing by the end of the week. Friday, to be exact." I stared at him, my mind struggling to connect his words to the reality of my day. The sterile smell of the hospital van, the pity in the nurse's eyes, the agonizing effort of climbing my own front steps alone. None of it registered on his face. I said nothing, my silence a question he refused to answer. Chloe took that as her cue. "What Mark is saying, Clark, is that we need your help to make this happen. It's a sure thing. The projected return is over 30% in the first 2 years. She smiled, a bright, empty gesture. "All we need is a co-signer on the loan. The bank just needs a little more collateral to feel comfortable." My gaze drifted from her perfectly manicured hands to the papers on the table. On the top page I could see the number, stark and black against the white paper. $200,000. $200,000. They had left me to fend for myself, in pain and barely able to walk, so they could come here and ask me to leverage the only thing I had left for their own ambition. "The house has so much equity just sitting here, doing nothing," Mark added quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. "This is a way to make it work for the whole family. It's a win-win." That was it. That was the moment. The pain in my hip seemed to vanish, replaced by a strange, icy calm. The muffled sounds of the television from my neighbor's house, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, it all faded away. The world narrowed to the space between me and them. I looked at my son, at the boy whose hand I had guided to build a birdhouse, whose future I had funded with my life's savings. And I saw a stranger with my son's face, but with eyes that reflected only numbers and dollar signs. I looked at Chloe, at her calculated smile, and I saw the architect of this cold transaction. They weren't asking for help. They were claiming what they believed was already theirs. I slowly met Mark's gaze. I held it. I let the silence stretch, letting it become as heavy and uncomfortable as the unspoken truth in the room. I watched the eagerness in his eyes curdle into confusion, then into frustration. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I raised a single hand, a small, quiet gesture that stopped him cold. The king was back on his throne. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor of hurt I felt just moments before. "You need to leave now." Their faces froze, a perfect tableau of disbelief. Mark's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Chloe's painted-on smile tightened, cracking at the edges. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock, each second marking the death of the family I thought I had. They had walked in here expecting a frail old man, a rubber stamp for their ambitions. They were not prepared for a king on his throne, no matter how broken his body was. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Mark finally stammered, his voice a mixture of confusion and irritation. "We came here to help you, to present you with a future." "A future for you," I corrected him, my voice still quiet, but now it felt like it had weight, like a stone dropped into a still pond. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. The quiet was more powerful than any shout. Chloe stood up, her posture rigid with indignation. She smoothed down her expensive silk blouse, a pointless gesture of regaining control. "Clark, you are being incredibly selfish and difficult. After all we do for you. This is a simple business transaction that benefits everyone. You are letting emotion cloud a perfectly logical decision." There it was, a business transaction. That's all this was. That's all I was. The last bit of lingering sentiment in my heart evaporated, replaced by something cold and hard as steel. I didn't respond. I just sat there, my hands resting on the worn leather arms of my chair, and watched them. My silence was a wall they couldn't break down. It unnerved them. They were used to arguments they could win, emotional pleas they could manipulate. They had no strategy for a quiet, unmovable refusal. Mark's face flushed with anger. "Fine. Be that way," he spat, grabbing the loan documents from the table with a violent sweep of his arm. "Sit here and rot in your precious house. But when we're rich, don't come asking us for anything." They stormed out. The front door slammed shut with a boom that seemed to shake the entire foundation of the house, a foundation I had poured with my own hands. The silence they left behind was different. It wasn't empty or lonely anymore, it was clear. It was a blank slate. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The scent of Chloe's perfume was already fading, and the familiar smell of old books and lemon polish was returning. The house was mine again. They thought they had delivered the final blow. They thought my refusal was the end of the story. They were so wrong, it was the beginning. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my generosity for foolishness. They saw an old man in a chair. They didn't see the years of planning, of saving, of building. They didn't see the mind that was now, for the first time in years, completely and utterly focused. They wouldn't see this coming. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself up. Each step with the walker was a beat in a new rhythm. I didn't go to the kitchen, I didn't go to bed, I went to the old oak desk in the corner of the room. I didn't sleep that night. Pain and purpose are a potent combination, and they kept me wide awake. In the pre-dawn stillness, with the house bathed in the soft gray light that comes before the sun, I sat at my oak desk. The loan documents they'd left on the coffee table were in the trash. In front of me, I had laid out the real paperwork of my life. The deed to the house, dated May 11th, 1987. My wife's death certificate, a cold, official document from April 3rd, 2016. My current will, a simple 2-page affair from 2017 that left everything, without condition, to my only son, Mark. And finally, a meticulously kept ledger where, for the past 40 years, I'd recorded every major expense and investment. It was all there in my neat architectural script. September 15th, 2018. $50,000 gift to Mark for home down payment. And more recently, November 3rd, 2021, $2,000 personal loan to Mark. And January 21st, 2022, $3,500 personal loan to Mark. Seeing it all laid out like that, in black and white, didn't feel emotional. It felt like an audit. An audit of a failed investment. The sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the oak trees when I made my first call. The coffee maker gurgled beside me, filling the kitchen with its familiar, comforting aroma, but today it smelled like fuel. I dialed the number for the law firm that had handled my family's affairs for half a century. Arthur, my old lawyer, had passed away a few years back, but his son David had taken over the practice. I remembered him as a serious kid who used to come over with his father for barbecues. David Mills speaking. His voice was deep, steady, just like his father's. "David, it's Clark Gable. I need to come see you. I need to make some changes to my estate plan. Immediately." There was no hesitation on his end. "Of course, Clark. Can you be here at 10? At precisely 9:45 a.m., I was sitting in the waiting room of Mills & Mills. The office was a time capsule of quiet dignity. Dark wood, leather-bound books, the faint scent of old paper and furniture polish. It was a world away from the glass and chrome ambition of my son's life. David came out himself to greet me. He was a man in his late 40s now, with his father's kind eyes but a sharper, more modern cut to his suit. He helped me with my walker into his office and closed the door. He didn't rush me. He just sat behind his large mahogany desk and waited. So I told him everything. I didn't editorialize or get emotional. I just stated the facts, like an incident report. The surgery, the call, the hospital transport van, the arrival of Mark and Chloe, and finally, the $200,000 loan application. I slid the ledger across the desk to him. He read through the last few entries, his expression hardening. "I see," he said, his voice a low rumble. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "Clark, what do you want to do?" "I want to build a fortress," I told him. "I want to ensure that the foundation I built, this house, my savings, everything I worked my entire life for is protected. Not just after I'm gone, but starting right now." David nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding, and maybe even admiration in his eyes. "We can do that," he said. "We'll start by creating a revocable living trust. Think of it as a legal entity, a vault. You transfer ownership of your assets, primarily the house, into the trust. You will be the trustee, so you retain full control over everything until your death. But the trust is the legal owner. This means the house can't be used as collateral for a loan without your express action as trustee, and it completely bypasses the will upon your death. It's a much stronger shield." He explained that we would also draft a new will, a pour-over will, that would catch any assets not in the trust and pour them into it. And I would name a new executor and a successor trustee, not Mark. "How quickly can this be done?" I asked. "I can have the trust documents and the new will drafted by Thursday," he said. "That's 3 days from now. We'll need to file a new deed with the county clerk to transfer the house into the trust. The whole process should be legally airtight within 10 business days. My fee for establishing the trust and executing the new will is a flat $4, $500. I didn't even blink. "Do it," I said. My next stop was the bank. The same bank where I'd gotten the cashier's check for Mark's down payment. I sat down with the branch manager, a woman I'd known for years, and explained that I was restructuring my finances under legal advisement. By the time I left an hour later, I had closed my old savings account, the one Mark had been linked to for emergencies, and opened a new one under a different account number. I had the $52, $314.87 from that account transferred into the new one. I also placed a verbal and written notice on my checking account. No overdrafts would be honored, and no transfers were to be authorized to any third-party accounts without my physical presence and signature. Every door was being locked. Every window was being bolted. The free-flowing Bank of Dad was officially closed for business. That evening, I found myself in the garage. The air was cool and smelled of sawdust and oil. My hands, a bit unsteady, found their way to the small, crooked birdhouse on the shelf. I ran my thumb over the faded blue paint. I remembered the weight of Mark's small hand in mine, guiding the hammer. "Measure twice, cut once." I had told him. You build things to last. He had forgotten the most important lesson. A foundation isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about respect. And he and his wife had taken a sledgehammer to it. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it had a new job now. It was fuel. I placed the birdhouse back on the shelf, its place secure. I went back inside, the plan solidifying in my mind. The papers from David would be ready soon. They had wanted my signature on a document that would have chained me to their greed. Instead, I would put my signature on a document that would set me free. The 2 days between my visit to David's office and the signing of the documents were a study in silence. My phone, which usually sat quietly on the end table, buzzed with a frantic energy it hadn't known in years. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The first day there were 4 missed calls from Mark and 2 from Chloe. They were followed by a barrage of text messages. I read them, my face impassive. They ranged from feigned concern, "Dad, are you okay? We're worried," to outright manipulation. "We really need to talk about this opportunity. It's slipping away." I ignored them all. My silence was a language they didn't speak, and it was driving them mad. I spent my time methodically, each action a small brick in the new wall I was building around my life. I ate simple meals, did my physical therapy exercises with a grim determination, and sat in my leather armchair, not in loneliness, but in contemplation. The house felt different, as if it were holding its breath alongside me, waiting for the next step. Thursday, October 27th, arrived crisp and clear. The autumn leaves on the oak trees were a riot of gold and crimson against a brilliant blue sky. I dressed carefully, putting on the same gray suit I had worn to Helen's funeral. It felt appropriate. I was burying something that day, too. The naive belief that blood was an unbreakable bond. The drive to David's office was slow, my hands steady on the wheel. When I arrived, David had everything laid out on his conference table, a vast expanse of polished cherry wood that reflected the light from the tall windows. The documents were in a thick, navy blue binder. On the cover, in gold lettering, was the title, "The Helen and Clark Gable Family Trust." Seeing her name next to mine felt like a benediction. It felt right. David walked me through each page with painstaking clarity. There was the Declaration of Trust, the legal instrument that brought the entity to life. There was the new pour-over will, a simple document now, which stated that any asset not already in the trust would be transferred into it upon my passing. He pointed to the section naming the successor trustee, David Mills himself, with instructions to liquidate the estate and donate the proceeds to the local trade school's scholarship fund. Mark's name was nowhere to be found. Finally, there was the new deed, transferring the property at 1148 Oakwood Lane from Clark Gable to the Helen and Clark Gable Family Trust. I picked up the heavy, black fountain pen David offered me. The paper was thick, almost like parchment. My signature, once a shaky scrawl in the days after surgery, was now firm and decisive. I signed each document where indicated. A notary, a pleasant woman named Mrs. Peterson, witnessed my signature and then embossed each page with her official seal. The stamp came down with a solid, satisfying thud. It was done. I wrote a check for the full amount of his services, $4,500, and slid it across the table. It was the best money I had ever spent. As I was leaving, my phone rang. This time, I answered. It was Chloe. Her voice was sharp, brittle with impatience. "Clark, finally, Mark is a wreck. We've been calling nonstop. You can't just shut us out like this. The deadline for the investment is tomorrow at 5 p.m. We're willing to forgive your little outburst the other night, but you need to come to the bank with us this afternoon." Forgive me, the audacity of it was almost breathtaking. I stood by the window in David's waiting room, looking out at the calm street. "There is nothing to discuss, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly level. "What do you mean there's nothing to discuss? This is our future we're talking about." "Are you really going to be this selfish?" she demanded, her voice rising. "My decision is final," I said, and before she could respond, I ended the call. I felt no anger, no satisfaction. Just the quiet click of a lock falling into place. My work wasn't finished. From the law office, I drove to my insurance agent. I had a life insurance policy, number 74B92188, for a sum of $250,000. For 30 years, Mark had been the sole beneficiary. I sat with my agent, a man I'd sent a Christmas card to every year, and filled out a change of beneficiary form. The process took less than 15 minutes. The new beneficiary was the trust. Every single thread was being cut. Every loophole was being sealed. When I got home, the house felt more solid, more mine than it had in years. That evening, a technician I had called the day before arrived. He installed a new security system, complete with 4 high-definition cameras. One covered the front porch, one the driveway, one the back deck, and a final one covering the side entrance from the garage. The system cost $899.99, and I paid with my credit card. From a simple app on my phone, I could now see every angle of my property. It wasn't about fear. It was about control. It was about having a clear, undeniable record of reality. The final step took place the next morning, Friday, October 28th, the day of their deadline. I drove to the county clerk's office downtown, a stern granite building where the records of lives were kept in endless rows of files. I took the newly signed and notarized deed to the records counter. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, took the document, inspected it, and stamped it with the date and time, 9:32 a.m. She typed the information into her computer, and with a few keystrokes, the ownership of 1148 Oakwood Lane was officially and publicly transferred. My home was no longer just a house. It was a fortress. Legally, it was no longer an asset in my name that a bank could easily place a lien against. It was held by an entity I controlled completely, an entity designed for one purpose: to execute my final wishes. Wishes that no longer included my son. I walked out of that building into the bright morning sun, leaning on my walker, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. They had until 5 p.m. to secure their future. They just didn't know their biggest supposed asset had vanished into thin air. I wondered what the bank would say when they ran a title search. I wondered what expression they would have on their faces. I wouldn't have to wonder for long. The first sign of the storm came not as a thunderclap, but as a notification on my phone. It was 3:47 p.m. on Friday. I was sitting in my leather armchair, a cup of lukewarm coffee on the table beside me, when the screen lit up. A motion alert from the driveway camera. I tapped it open and watched the live feed. Mark's pearl-white SUV had screeched into the driveway, kicking up a spray of gravel. The doors flew open before the engine was even off. They didn't walk to the front door. They marched, their bodies stiff with fury. Chloe was a step ahead of Mark, her face a mask of cold rage. I watched them on the small screen, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. There was no fear, no anxiety, only a quiet, detached curiosity. The doorbell didn't chime. A fist hammered against the solid oak. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was flat and ugly in the quiet house. I let them knock again, letting their desperation build on my front porch. Then, using my walker, I made my way to the door. I didn't open it all the way. I simply turned the deadbolt and pulled it open a few inches, leaving the security chain latched. Through the gap I could see them, their faces flushed, their chests heaving. The cool autumn air rushed into the hall. "What did you do?" Mark blurted out, his voice cracking. He looked frantic, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "We were at the bank. They ran the title search. It says the house isn't in your name. It says it belongs to some trust." I looked at my son, at his wild, accusing eyes, and felt nothing but a profound sense of distance. "My affairs are in order," I said, my voice even. "In order?" Chloe hissed, pushing past Mark to get closer to the door. Her voice was like shattering glass. "You've sabotaged us, Clark. That's what you've done. We had a signed letter of intent. The funding was approved pending collateral. You deliberately, maliciously sabotaged our future." I met her glare without flinching. The future you were building had no room for me, except as a line of credit. I simply closed that line. "This is our inheritance," Mark shouted, his desperation boiling over into raw entitlement. "That house is supposed to be mine. You can't just give it away to some legal thing." "This house stopped being your inheritance the moment you saw it as nothing more than an asset to be leveraged," I replied calmly. "It is my home, and I have secured it." Chloe let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Secured it? You're an old man who just had major surgery. You need us." "Who do you think is going to take care of you when you can't get out of that chair? That lawyer of yours? A trust?" Her words were meant to be a threat, a reminder of my vulnerability. But they had the opposite effect. They solidified my resolve until it was as hard and unyielding as granite. I looked past them, to the oak tree Helen and I had planted, its leaves a brilliant gold in the afternoon sun. I had built a life here. I had survived loss here. I would not be threatened in my own home. I have made arrangements for my care, I said, my voice dropping, carrying a finality that silenced them both for a beat. Arrangements that do not involve you. You seem to have forgotten something. This is my property, my money, my life. You are not entitled to any of it. Mark's face crumpled. The anger drained away, replaced by a pathetic, pleading look. Dad, please, it's not too late. Just undo it. Go back to the lawyer. We can still make the 5 p.m. deadline. We'll lose our deposit. It's $20,000, Dad. Please. $20,000. The number hung in the air. A fraction of what I had given him for his first house. A gift he had long since forgotten. I thought of the $50,000 cashier's check. I thought of the small, steady withdrawals. I thought of the birdhouse in the garage, a monument to a time when our relationship was worth more than a transaction. No, I said. The word was small, but it was absolute. It was a wall. Your deadline is not my concern. Your deposit is not my concern. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. I saw the exact moment the hope died in their eyes. It was like a light being switched off. Chloe's face hardened into a sneer of pure contempt. Mark just looked broken, lost. He had gambled everything on the assumption that I was a weak, sentimental old fool. He had lost. Without another word, I closed the door. The security chain rattled, and I slid the deadbolt home. The heavy thud echoed through the hall. It was the sound of the end. I walked back to the living room, picked up my phone, and watched the camera feed. They stood on the porch for a full minute, stunned into silence. Then the argument started. Chloe's arms were waving, her words, though inaudible, clearly sharp and vicious. Mark just stood there, running his hands through his hair, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They were no longer a power couple executing a plan. They were just two greedy people who had overplayed their hand and were now turning on each other. They finally retreated to their car, slamming the doors, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. I watched until they were gone. The house was quiet again. But this time, it was a victorious silence. It was the silence of a fortress whose walls had held. A week passed. A week of blessed, uninterrupted silence. The rhythm of my life began to find its footing again, no longer dictated by grief or anger, but by a quiet purpose. My hip was healing, the sharp, biting pain dulling to a persistent ache. I could now walk from the kitchen to my armchair without the walker, my hand just ghosting along the wall for support. Each step was a small victory. The house felt settled, the air clean. I had spoken to David Mills twice, confirming all the paperwork was filed and legally binding. The fortress was complete. I was in my armchair on a Tuesday afternoon, reading an old book on woodworking, the scent of brewing tea hanging in the air, when I heard a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the doorbell. It was the distinct sound of a key turning in the front door lock. I placed my book down, my body tensing. The door swung open, and they walked in, Mark and Chloe. They didn't knock, they didn't call. They used a key Mark hadn't returned in 10 years, an act of entitlement so profound it left me breathless. They walked into my living room as if they owned it, their faces set like stone. Chloe was holding a stiff leather portfolio. Mark wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the shag rug, the same one he took his first steps on. They stood before my chair, casting long shadows in the afternoon light. "We gave you a week to come to your senses, Clark," Chloe began, her voice devoid of any warmth. She opened her portfolio with a sharp snap. "Since you've chosen to be irrational, we've been forced to explore other options." She slid a document onto the coffee table. I didn't need to read it. I could see the letterhead of a different law firm at the top. "This is a letter of intent," she continued, her voice cold and clinical. "We've spoken to our attorney. Given your recent major surgery, your age, and your erratic and self-destructive financial decisions, we have a very strong case to file for conservatorship." My blood ran cold. Conservatorship. They wanted to declare me incompetent, to strip me of my autonomy, my home, my life. They wanted to put me in a cage of their own making. Mark finally looked up, his face a mask of pained sincerity. It was a terrible performance. "Dad, we don't want to do this." but you're not thinking clearly. You need someone to manage your affairs to protect you from yourself. This is for your own good." He pointed to the documents Chloe had brought. "Just sign everything back over to the way it was, and this all goes away. We can forget this ever happened. We can be a family again." A family. The word was a grotesque mockery coming from his lips. I looked from his pleading face to Chloe's smug, confident expression. They had rehearsed this. They had planned this attack, believing my mind was as weak as my body. They saw this as their checkmate. I leaned back in my leather throne, the old material creaking softly. I let the silence hang in the air, a thick, heavy blanket. I watched their confidence waver, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. They were expecting me to yell, to argue, to break down. They were not prepared for the calm. Slowly I reached for the small tablet I kept on the end table. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. Their eyes followed my every motion. I tapped the screen a few times, my fingers steady. Then I turned it to face them. On the screen, a crystal-clear video began to play. It was the feed from my front porch camera, from the Friday before. Mark's voice, tinny and desperate, filled the quiet room. "This is our inheritance. That house is supposed to be mine. You can't just give it away." The video continued, showing Chloe's sneering face. "You're an old man who just had major surgery. Who do you think is going to take care of you?" Their faces went pale. Chloe's mouth fell open, a silent "oh" of disbelief. Mark looked like he had been punched in the stomach. All the air went out of him. He stumbled back a step, staring at the tablet as if it were a venomous snake. "As you can see," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have been making arrangements. The house is now equipped with a full security system. It records both video and audio. Everything you said last week is saved. And everything you are saying right now," I paused, letting the implication sink in, "is also being recorded." The color drained completely from Chloe's face. The portfolio slipped from her numb fingers, scattering papers across the floor. The legal threats, the talk of conservatorship, it was all hot air, and now it was evidence. Evidence of their conspiracy, their attempted coercion. They hadn't come here to protect me. They had come to threaten me, and I had a perfect, undeniable record of it. I stood up, pushing myself out of the chair. I didn't need the wall for support this time. I stood tall. "The foundation of this family was built on a simple lesson I tried to teach you when you were a boy, Mark. We were in the garage, building a little birdhouse. I told you to measure twice and cut once. To build things to last. You forgot that lesson. You thought you could take a shortcut to a fortune by destroying the very foundation you were built upon." I looked at the key in the front door, still dangling from the lock. "That key is a symbol of trust. A trust you have shattered into a million pieces. Leave it on the table. Then get out of my house. Get out of my life. If you or your attorney ever contact me again, this footage goes to the police and to a judge. Your case for conservatorship will become a case for elder abuse and extortion. Do you understand me?" They were utterly broken. There was no fight left in them. Chloe, a woman who had walked in radiating power and control, couldn't even meet my gaze. Mark was visibly trembling. He shuffled to the door, pulled his key from the lock, and placed it on the hall table. It landed with a soft, final clink. They turned and walked out, not with anger, but with the hollow, shuffling gait of the utterly defeated. I watched them go. Then I closed the door and locked it for the last time. The fortress was secure. The king was home. In the months that followed, the silence in the house transformed once more. It was no longer the heavy, waiting silence of a fortress under siege, but the light, peaceful silence of a sanctuary. The seasons turned, and the fiery autumn leaves of the oak trees gave way to the stark, elegant branches of winter. My hip healed, the deep ache replaced by a new strength. I no longer needed the walker, and the cane I used for a while now rests by the front door, more a reminder of a battle won than a tool I need for support. My days found a new, gentle rhythm. I woke with the sun, made my coffee, and would sit not in my armchair, but at the kitchen table, watching the cardinals and blue jays that flocked to the new bird feeder I'd installed. My life became my own again, filled not with anxiety, but with the simple joy of creation. The garage, once a space tainted by Chloe's dismissive words, was reclaimed. The sharp, clean scent of sawdust filled the air as I began to work with my hands again. I didn't tackle any big projects. I started small, restoring old picture frames, sanding down the worn edges and giving them new life with a fresh coat of varnish. Each stroke of the brush was a meditation. I wasn't just restoring wood, I was restoring myself. One afternoon, while organizing my tools, my hand fell upon the small, crooked birdhouse Mark and I had built all those years ago. For so long, seeing it had been a stab of pain, a monument to a broken promise. Now I looked at it and felt something different. I saw the clumsy hammer marks of a 7-year-old boy, and I saw the patient guidance of a loving father. The memory was mine. The love was real, even if the man that boy became had lost his way. The birdhouse wasn't a symbol of his betrayal anymore. It was a testament to my values, to the lesson I had tried to teach: build things to last, with care and integrity. I heard through a neighbor that Mark and Chloe had to sell their pearl-white SUV and had put their large modern house on the market. The lost deposit on their once-in-a-lifetime deal had apparently triggered a cascade of financial trouble they couldn't contain. I felt no joy in hearing this, only a distant, quiet sadness for the son I once knew. They had built their foundation on sand, and the tide had come in. Last Saturday, on a surprisingly warm spring morning, I took the little birdhouse down from the shelf. I cleaned off the decades of dust, tightened a loose nail on the roof, and gave it a fresh coat of bright blue paint. When it was dry, I carried it outside. I chose a spot on the thickest branch of the oak tree Helen and I planted together, the one right outside the living room window. As I secured it in place, a pair of wrens swooped down to inspect my work. I went back inside and settled into my leather armchair, my throne. From there, I had a perfect view. The house felt warm, filled with light. It was no longer just an asset to be protected, but a home to be lived in. My legacy wouldn't be a number on a bank statement, or a piece of property passed down out of obligation. It would be in the quiet dignity of a well-lived life, in the strength of standing up for yourself, and in the simple, enduring beauty of a little blue birdhouse, finally serving its purpose, built to last. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. Looking back on it all, the silence that once felt like a wound has become my greatest comfort. It's a silence filled not with absence, but with the quiet, sturdy presence of self-respect. My son and his wife believed my value was tied to my assets, that this house was just collateral waiting to be claimed. They thought a foundation was something you could buy and sell, a number on a piece of paper. But the lesson this ordeal burned into my soul, the one I want to leave with you, is that a true foundation is invisible. It's built from the choices you make every single day. The choice to be honest, to act with integrity, and to respect the people and principles that helped build you. They saw an old man, recovering and frail, and they completely underestimated the strength of a lifetime spent building things the right way. They wanted to take my house, but in the end, all they truly lost was their own home, because a life built on a foundation of greed can never stand for long. My real legacy won't be this house or the money in the bank. It's the profound peace I feel now, sitting in this chair, watching a family of wrens build their nest in that little blue house in the oak tree. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I stood my ground, not out of spite, but out of a duty to honor the life, the work, and the love that built this place. True strength, I've learned, isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you refuse to let them take from you, and chief among those things is your own dignity. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.